When you think of the princess in Clash Royale, you probably picture the card that fires flaming arrows across the arena. But even before she became a legendary troop you could actually play, the princess was already standing tall, overlooking every single battle. I'm of course talking about the Tower Princess, the iconic figure sitting at the top of your crown towers. But despite always being in sight, she's not just decoration. Over the years, the Princess Tower has seen visual changes, balance updates that directly affected her towers, and even lore connections that tied her more deeply to the Clash universe. And in 2024, she finally saw some competition from newcomers. So today we're going to look at her full story, from her earliest appearances, through the subtle updates that shaped her presence, to the big moment in 2024 that gave players a whole new way to play with tower troops. As I just mentioned, the princess has been a part of Clash Royale since the very beginning, even back in the beta. And while her role has always been the same, standing proudly on top of your defensive towers, her design hasn't always stayed completely static. If we compare her early appearance to what we see today, a few key differences pop out. For instance, her crown was originally gold before later being changed to silver, and even her animations have shifted over time. But the history of the Tower Princess actually goes much further back, before the beta and even before the game was officially called Clash Royale. We know this thanks to an official Supercell book called The Art of Supercell. In it, the development of several Supercell games is showcased, complete with concept art and behind-the-scenes visuals. In the Clash Royale section of the book, we can see that back then, it was a project known as Wizard Arena Clash of Clans. The entire game looked completely different from what we know today, but if you look closely, you can see some of that DNA that would eventually become Clash Royale. For example, there were no princess towers whatsoever. Instead, you had these glowing blue crystal structures acting as defenses. It didn't take long for the developers to bring in characters from the Clash of Clans universe, and soon after, they started adding entirely new ones. In this book, we got a look at the concept art for the royals. It shows early iterations of the king, the royal giant, and even the princess herself, showing she had an early place in the game. Clash Royale also made an Instagram post about their development. They shared a screenshot of the game in its test build back in August of 2015. Here, the game already looks a lot more recognizable. The iconic Clash Royale font is in place for the cards and the timer, and on the battlefield, we can spot familiar troops like the knight, barbarians, and goblins. The towers themselves also look closer to princess towers as we know them today, but there's one big difference. Instead of princesses standing on top, they were manned by archers. The one on the player's side wore cloaks, giving them a unique look. And interestingly, there was still no king tower. But before we show you what we had instead of a king tower, I would like to ask you to consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me out a ton, as these videos take a lot of effort to make. I appreciate it. Anyway, where were we? Right, instead of a king tower, there was a massive wizard that stood at the center of your defense, reminding us that the game's original title, Wizard Arena Clash of Clans, still gave the wizard a piece of importance in the game's design. And then finally, on January 4th, 2016, Supercell uploaded a video titled Gameplay First Look. This date also marked the official launch of Clash Royale's beta, and in that very first showcase, we were introduced to the iconic princess towers for the very first time. Since tower troops didn't exist until 2024, 2016 didn't bring any major gameplay changes for the Princess Tower. However, the November 2016 update did tweak the shooting animation of the princess standing atop the tower. Her movements became noticeably smoother, and she now leans backward more clearly before firing her arrows. November 3rd, 2016, Supercell released special offers for iOS players called the Hero Pack Red and the Pouch of Gems Red. Anyone who purchased these offers received red decorations around their crown towers, which remained in place until December 6th, 2016. This didn't affect your princess towers though at all, so while it is the first time we got some type of skin, it wasn't quite a skin for the princess towers.
Starting November 30th, you can purchase a red pack. It includes 500 gems and a temporary reskin on your king's tower. This promotional offer ends on December 6th. The temporary reskin on your King's Tower will be removed once the event is over. When you purchase the Red Pack, you help support the campaign. 100% of the proceeds goes towards the Global Fund to support HIV and AIDS in prevention, treatment, counseling, and testing in Africa.
Up next, on March 16th, 2017, a maintenance break brought a change to the arena towers, increasing their projectile speed from 400 to 600. This adjustment was made to fix some unexpected behavior that the towers had been showing. Fast forward a few months to October 9th, 2017, where we received the Epic Quests update. This update introduced a crown tower skin that gave the towers the Elixir Collector's production animation. This skin was used in special event challenges, where the towers generated elixir at a higher rate, such as double elixir, triple elixir, and rare ramp-up. The update also added 2 more Crown Tower skins which appeared in the Gold Rush and Gem Rush events respectively. 2 months later, on December 12, 2017, the Electrifying update changed the crowns on the Crown Towers from gold to silver. Now, the reason for this change wasn't officially stated, but it seems likely it was done to avoid confusion and create a clear distinction between the original Princess card and the Tower Princess, since the Princess card itself sports a golden crown. On December 22, 2017, a holiday-themed Crown Tower skin was added. The skin appeared exclusively in the Royal Ghost Mirror Challenge. It featured Christmas lights, a festive wreath, and a touch of snow. What made this particularly cool was, at the time, actual tower skins like the ones we have today just didn't exist yet, so it was a rare glimpse of seasonal flair on the towers. Then, more than 3 years after the game's release, the July 2019 update introduced Crown Tower skins, which could be unlocked through Pass Royale. We finally got tower skins, and although they were only available to players who spent money, it was still a really cool addition to the game. Later on, they would get some skins available for gems, which were a lot more free-to-play friendly, as they were 1,000 gems per skin. Not cheap, but definitely doable for free-to-play players. From this point onwards, each new season introduced fresh Princess Tower skins. In 2021, players even gained the option to randomize their tower skin before battle, adding a bit more variety to every match. Later that same year, Princess Towers, along with all cards, were able to level up to level 14. And less than 2 years later, level 15 was added, which of course affected the Princess Towers as well. But everything changed on December 13th, 2023. This was the day Supercell announced something completely new to Clash Royale: Tower Troops. Up until this point, the Tower Princess had never been considered a card, and really, why would she? She was always present in every single match, automatically leveling up alongside your King Towers, but with the introduction of Tower Troops, that line suddenly became blurred. The very first Tower Troop revealed was the Cannoneer, and he instantly set the stage for how groundbreaking this idea could be. For the first time ever, we got a whole new way to use our Crown Towers. And because you'd be able to swap your Tower Princess for the Cannoneer, it needed to be a card so you could slot it in and out of your deck. January 1st, 2024 is when the Cannoneer became available for players. There was some controversy due to the insane shop offer making him hard to unlock, let alone upgrade or max out. The Cannoneer launched as a very strong card, so strong in fact it didn't take long for him to receive 2 nerfs in a row. But before those nerfs, does that mean he was essentially a replacement for the Tower Princess? Well, not quite. His role was very different. The Cannoneer fired much slower, but his shots dealt massive damage. That made him fantastic against big tanks like Giant or Golem, but against Skeleton Army, say goodbye to your entire tower. Because of this, the Cannoneer demanded very specific decks that could cover his weaknesses. You needed splash cards that were affordable and reliable to pair with him. So he never truly replaced the Princess Towers, but in the right deck, he could definitely be the better pick. But how could you actually unlock the Cannoneer? After all, he was, just an epic card. And yet, like I mentioned earlier, he was still notoriously difficult to unlock and upgrade. So why was that the case for an epic? Despite being an epic card, the Cannoneer couldn't be found in the usual ways. Instead, he was locked behind the brand new Tower Troop chest, which looked way cooler than it actually was. What made it even stronger was that the chest could still give you Tower Princesses, yet whenever you reached the next King Tower level, your level up chest already contained the exact number of Tower Princesses and the gold you needed for the upgrade. So yeah, Tower Troop chests have always kind of been weird and useless, but at least whenever you got them, there was no timer for it to open. But they would become more valuable with the first update. This was the day Dagger Duchess was added to the game, and April 1st was the perfect day to release this Tower Troop because the balancing for her was an absolute joke. Unlike the Cannoneer, who at least had some clear weaknesses, like a slower fire rate and less hit points, the Dagger Duchess felt like she had it all. She came with way more health, and her damage output was insane. She attacked so quickly that she could completely shut down cards like Firecracker, Wall Breakers, and countless other threats that would normally demand a response. The Cannoneer was strong, but you were required to build around his flaws. His slower hit speed and lower health meant he was only at his best in certain decks, and he never truly replaced the Tower Princess. The Dagger Duchess, on the other hand, didn't just compete with the Tower Princess, princess, she outright deleted her from the game. There was almost no reason to prefer the tower princess when the duchess exists, and she even overshadowed the cannoneer in most situations. It's hard to deny it. More health, better and faster damage, and no real weaknesses. Her so-called weakness was supposed to be beatdown decks like Golem and Giant. On paper, she ran out of daggers and was left vulnerable, especially if a big tank was in front, soaking damage. The idea was that she couldn't exactly shoot daggers safely from behind a tank the way a ranged troop could. But in practice, that weakness didn't really exist. She always provided so much value before running out, and in that meta, beatdown decks weren't even that strong to begin with, so by the time she was spent, your other troops had usually already cleaned things up and were perfectly fine finishing the defense. Everyone, and I mean everyone, was playing Dagger Duchess. The only people who weren't were the ones who either didn't have her unlocked or didn't have her leveled up high enough yet. And speaking of leveling, here's where things got even worse. Remember how I said the cannoneer was already hard to unlock and upgrade despite being an epic tower troop? Well, the Dagger Duchess was legendary, which meant her accessibility was even lower, and her power level was even more frustrating for those who didn't have her. Luckily, it didn't take long for her to get hit with a nerf hammer. Supercell stepped in and dropped her health by 15.8%, which on paper was massive. To put that in perspective, before this nerf, she actually had more hit points than a Princess Tower, which is just absurd, considering that she also dished out so much more damage. After this nerf, she finally had less health than the Princess Tower, which at least made her feel a little less indestructible. But despite this pretty significant change, she was still way too strong. That 14% reduction might have lowered her tankiness, but it did not touch the real reason she was dominating: her insane damage output, the value she generated before running out of daggers, and the fact that the meta simply didn't have the right tools to deal with her effectively. So yeah, technically nerfed, but in reality, she was still a nightmare to play against. By this point, the meta had completely stalled out. Cycle decks, once the bread and butter of Clash Royale, were basically unplayable. The Dagger Duchess warped the game so heavily that faster strategies just couldn't keep up. The cannoneer, while still technically viable, was only hanging around in very specific niche decks like Mortar, and the Princess Tower, just forget about it. She was practically erased from the game's identity at higher levels of play, completely overshadowed and irrelevant. So in June of 2024, Supercell finally decided enough was enough. The Dagger Duchess was slapped with a massive 27% damage nerf. That is not a small adjustment, that is a full-on takedown. A nerf so massive that it was basically an admission that she'd been released in a completely broken state. The Princess Tower had finally clawed its way back into the spotlight. After months of being completely invalidated, she was once again a reliable and competitive choice. The Dagger Duchess, while still usable, was no longer the unstoppable monster she had once been. Her 27% damage nerf had already cut her down to size, but in July, Supercell went even further, hitting her with another nerf that increased her cooldown and slowed her attack speed. This was the breaking point. From this moment on, the Duchess was clearly worse than the Princess Tower in most situations. The cannoneer didn't fare much better either. It remained a niche pick at best, still tied to very specific setups where the Princess Tower reclaimed her rightful throne. And that was the real story here. The classic, simple design proved that you don't need flashy gimmicks or overloaded mechanics to be the #1 tower troop. Consistency and balance were enough. But just when things seemed to be stabilizing, 2024 threw yet another curveball. Skipping ahead 5 months to December, Supercell introduced a brand new tower troop, the Royal Chef.
At least we're healing. Oh, level 17 P.E.K.K.A is shredding that. Oh my, and it's gonna heal up. Please, Rogo's level 18 P.E.K.K.A. Okay, this is what I wanted. Level 18 P.E.K.K.A, it's healing a shit ton. The amount of damage that hit just did is fucking crazy.
Now, unlike the Duchess or Cannoneer, the Chef wasn't designed to dominate through raw firepower. Instead, his entire gimmick revolved around support. Mechanically, here's how he worked. The Royal Chef cooks up pancakes, and every 24 to 40 seconds he would toss them onto your troop with the highest hit points on the field. That pancake instantly increased that troop's level by 1. So if you had a level 14 Mega Minion or P.E.K.K.A, suddenly became a level 15 monster in the middle of battle. There were some caveats though. The chef's cooking process slowed down whenever he was actively attacking, meaning that he couldn't just sit in the backline and pump out pancakes non-stop if he was being pressured. On top of that, he would only serve pancakes to troops that hadn't already quote-unquote eaten. So in other words, he couldn't just keep stacking levels endlessly on a single unit. He had to spread the buff across different allies. This mechanic was completely new for Clash Royale. Instead of being a damage dealer like the Princess Tower or a situational bruiser like the Cannoneer, the Royal Chef introduced a support role that fundamentally shifted how you thought about your tower troops. He could keep your biggest tanks alive longer, make already dangerous cards snowball even harder, and completely change the tide of a push if his pancake landed on the right troop at the right time. And compared to the Princess Tower, his stats weren't even that much worse. Sure, the Royal Chef had a little less damage and slightly less hit points, but that was a trade most players were more than willing to make in exchange for that sweet, sweet pancake. After all, a single level buff on the right troop could turn a good push into a game-ending one. But this power wasn't universal. In cycle decks, the chef really struggled to find a home. What good was it if your skeletons or ice spirits suddenly gained a level? They were still disposable, still fragile, and the payoff was nowhere near worth the slot he took up. So while cycle players stuck to their tried and true Princess Towers, the chef found his niche elsewhere, reviving beatdown strategies that had been fading and even spawning brand new archetypes. The most infamous of these was Evolved P.E.K.K.A paired with Evolved Goblin Giant. Already scary on their own, these evolutions became outright terrifying when boosted by the chef's pancake. Suddenly your so-called answers just weren't enough. A leveled up Evolved P.E.K.K.A could shred through defenses like paper, and with the Goblin Giant in front, soaking hits and dealing damage, pushes became overwhelming.
What are you doing, bro? Heal. Heal, Pecker! Oh my gosh! We didn't even need that goblin machine.
Another thing that made the Evo Goblin Giant so strong with the chef is that the spear goblins on his back and the stab goblins he spawned at half HP also had the level up. Add rage into the mix and it would become unstoppable. The chef wasn't just another tower troop. He was the piece that unlocked whole new combinations, giving slower, heavier decks the firepower and staying power they needed to compete again. It wouldn't take long for him to receive a nerf though, and then another nerf. He made an oppressive meta with beatdown ruling for about 3 months. So this brings us to April of 2025. The Dagger Duchess received another small nerf to her damage, and the Cannoneer was again only used in some niche decks. Princess Tower was yet again back on top. This time for real though. She was the most reliable tower troop that could work in any deck. But in May, the development team decided the Royal Chef could use a buff, an 8% increase to his hit points. This prompted people to go back to Evo Goblin Giant Evo P.E.K.K.A, and it wasn't pretty. The Goblin Machine had gotten better and the Goblin Curse made it so that everything took 20% more damage.
Reach! Reach! Curse! Oh, look at the damage! Oh my god!
Suddenly, players dusted off those old Evolved Goblin Giant and Evolved P.E.K.K.A decks, and the nightmare returned. This time, it was even worse. The Goblin Machine had quietly become stronger in updates, and the Goblin Curse effect, which made everything take 20% more damage, ballooned these beatdown pushes into absurd territory. A leveled up buffed P.E.K.K.A protected by a Goblin Giant was already difficult to stop, but with the curse stacking on top, defenses simply melted. The Royal Chef had reawakened the monster he was supposed to have left behind, and the Princess Tower was once again struggling to hold her place at the top. By August, the Royal Chef received a nerf to his cooking time, making it harder to boost your troops' levels as frequently. At the same time, the Goblin Curse was completely stripped of its damage amplification. I'm sorry, Ken. Despite these setbacks, the Royal Chef still held his ground, proving that even with adjustments, his utility and presence in the meta were hard to ignore. Meanwhile, the Princess Tower remained far from weak. In fact, she was used in the majority of decks and proved to be incredibly reliable across archetypes. But one of the most oppressive decks still revolved around the Royal Chef, pushing beatdown strategies to their limit. Luckily though, the work-in-progress balance changes for October are hinting at a 7% hit point reduction for the Chef, along with a series of nerfs to the Goblin Giant, the Goblin Machine, and even Rage. With these changes, this deck might finally be on the decline. Right, guys? Please. Please. But one thing is for sure, the princess has been and always will be a powerhouse. And if you want to find out the strongest state of every card in Clash Royale history, you gotta click the video on screen. Trust me, this is a good one. I'll see you there.